Welcome back. As we mentioned, there are many major political questions after the president's apparent decision to de-escalate tensions, at least for now, with Iran. After last night's strike, let's dive right into it. Joining me now, NBC News correspondent Carol Lee, MSNBC contributor, Washington Post foreign affairs columnist David Ignatius, and MSNBC political analyst and former RNC chairman Michael Steele. David, let me ask you this. The Secretary of Defense is now out there saying, hey, America's restored deterrence. Deterrence is back. The Iranians blinked, essentially. He doesn't say it that way. It seems, I'm not saying he's spiking the football. I do think everybody's aware there are proxy groups out there. But it does feel like the Trump administration thinks that they've exposed Iran here.
Well, I think everybody feels some relief today that this has not led to escalating all-out war. I think 24 hours ago we had genuine fears that might happen. So it's understandable that people in the administration, people around the world are saying, okay, this is a better outcome than we feared. The problem is that this confrontation, we're just in a pause. It's been going on for 40 years. We were very close to real all-out conflict. We've stepped back. But the underlying issues are the same. And Trump's, I want to say, non-strategy is the same. Maximum pressure, more sanctions. It's been obvious that doesn't work. It's been obvious that leads to ever greater confrontation. And I think we're still on the path for real difficulties. So, no, Secretary Esper is not right to be spiking the football, congratulating himself on a great win. I'm glad that it's not worse, but I still don't see a clear exit from the dilemma. If a diplomatic process starts, then let's talk about it.
I was just going to say, it doesn't seem, Carol, by Election Day, it's as if the Middle East looks better than it did when he took over. He's not going to be able to say that, and that's...
It's not only that, Chuck, but if his whole argument was that he was going to bring troops home, and the number of troops, particularly in the Middle East, has only increased.
There are going to be more troops in the Middle East.
And that is a big Democrat.
Say that again. I interrupted you.
Well, the number of troops, he promised to bring troops home. Right. And yet, since he came into office, the number of troops, specifically in the Middle East, who are deployed overseas, has increased. That's a huge Democratic talking point. He made this big promise to his voters. And the reason why he gets in this box is because he has these two threads that constantly contradict each other in his foreign policy. And that is, I'm bringing all the troops home, but wait, we're really tough, and we're going to, take all of this military action, and look at how much I've rebuilt the military. And those two, every time he is, leading into one, he's undermining the other, and he hasn't figured that out.
Michael Steele, what I find interesting about his base on this one is that, like 90% of the time, the base just basically says whatever he says, and they blindly follow. Not on this. There is a split, right? Tucker Carlson is willing to break with them. Mike Lee and Rand Paul are willing to break with them and stick by on this issue.
Yeah, you have the battle of the hawks versus the doves within the party itself. Those who believe, like a John Bolton, we should be engaged and, maximum pressure all the time.
And we should change. We regime change.
Right.
And we should lead to these things.
Yeah. It's sort of a holdover.
Mike Pompeo is part of this crowd.
Holdover from the Bush era of regime change, taking the flag and helping to plant it elsewhere around the globe. Then you have sort of the libertarian slash, not in my backyard, don't want any part of that. With Mike Lee and Rand Paul. And so, they're willing to step out there a little bit more and push up against that. Why? Because it doesn't necessarily, they can take the president on something like this without losing any points, because they've always kind of occupied this space and everybody kind of bakes them into the narrative.
David, to me, the real sort of not obvious political response is going to be over the debate about should we stay in Iraq or not. Because there are going to be people in both parties, when they hear Iraq say, hey, once you guys leave, they're going to say, yeah. And it'll be the Mike Lees of the world and maybe the Barbara Lees of the world.
Well,
okay? All the Lees, plus people not named Lee.
You saw a little bit of that.
Right.
Yeah.
The debate inside the Democratic Party, Joe Biden is going to be hesitant to pull everybody out, and the Bernie Sanders wing is like, hey, let's get the heck out.
So you and I were talking before the show about the possibility that Iran's long game here, the reason that they were relatively restrained in retaliating for Soleimani is they think they're going to win the prize called Iraq. That's a big strategic.
They're long game thinkers, and we know Donald Trump doesn't think about anything more than a week in advance.
So that and who's going to resist Trump when he says we've had enough of this? It's time for our troops to come home. What have we gotten from Iraq? And the problem is we'll have another country in the Middle East that will implode, and I fear will move as Syria did toward being a failed state. But I don't think you're going to hear a lot of resistance to that.
I don't either. That's the point. You're not going to have it.
But this is a president who criticized President Obama's withdrawal from Iraq, and so again, he's in this space that he can't seem to get out of, where he's saying one thing or he does one thing, and then he's caught in this where he says he doesn't want to be. If he was to pull all the troops out of Iraq, look, maybe the election calendar is as it is. There wouldn't be repercussions, and it wouldn't hurt him in November. So just strictly politically speaking. But he criticized President Obama for doing the same thing. And then you have Joe Biden. I traveled with Joe Biden when he closed Camp Victory in Iraq. He's kind of tangled up in this issue in all sorts of confusing ways as well. But the President Trump, he has an issue on this.
The key thing to what you're saying that's important to note, step back from President Trump and talk and think about Donald Trump, because Donald Trump's inclination is to not be there. All right? President Trump is faced with the reality that his rhetoric and his inclination to not be there is pressed upon by those who every time present to him, sir, you can't leave because of these circumstances and situations.
Well, he's also surrounded by two people in particular. I mean, it is bizarre. Mike Pence and Mike Pompeo are very much big hawks on this stuff.
Exactly.
Donald Trump not. And
they
have,
get in his ear,
yeah,
and they press on that nerve that says, okay, all right, we'll stay. Then you couple this action, which I think a lot of people aren't talking about for a lot of reasons right now, but I suspect will in the next few days, the alignment with the impeachment process and the hearing there. For Trump, that's sort of a political solution. This event's a political solution.
He thinks it is, although I think now, crisis averted, go back to the regular scheduled program.
Yeah, but
probably what's coming next week. I mean, it does feel as if that's where we're headed.
So wise people should think about the inevitability.
Only wise people.
Everybody should think about the reality that the number of American troops in Iraq is going to go down significantly. So how do we keep faith with the Iraqi government? How do we keep training their military and their intelligence service with a lot fewer people? Because that's the issue that's going to matter.
And can we find Iraq another ally in the Middle East other than Iran?
Right.
I mean, that's another problem, right? That's another problem. They're too close. They're two most important allies are us and Iran. That's a big problem.
One of the big problems, if we were to completely pull out of Iraq, is just that we have no eyes there. That's how ISIS happened. That's how the intelligence. We have no intelligence abilities there for Iran.
We'll put a pin in this.